This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD Hannah Blackwell. She is an immigration law attorney. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
Hannah, first of all, what does immigration law cover?
Immigration law covers everything from when a person enters the United States with or without status when they enter, or even when a U.S. American citizen or legal permanent resident marries someone without status. So wide variety. It can affect anyone, even beyond immigrants themselves.
Mhm, mhm. And how did you decide to become an immigration law attorney rather than some other specialty?
I've always loved working with immigrant populations. I think even from the time I was in high school, I noticed the impact that ICE raids or when the government comes in and rounds people up, for instance, from a workplace, the impact that that has on communities and families and just lives of all of these people, and the aftershock, the waves that it has on the rest of the people that know those people or work with those people. So I think that's what initially spurred it. Pair that with my love for culture, my love for language, and just people, working with people in general. And I find that a lot of the people I have the opportunity to work with in this capacity are really good, caring, hardworking people, and it makes me so happy to see the effect that I have on these people's lives as well.
Were you ever an activist helping immigrants before you became a lawyer advocating for them?
I went directly from, I actually did my bachelor's degree quickly. So during bachelor's, I worked in a legal capacity, more just getting court experience and such. I did teach ESL classes, English second language, so I got to work with immigrants like that. And I did some volunteer or asylum clinics where people get free access to asylum services. So in those ways I did, but then during law school, I had the opportunity to work with a former judge, Judge Fujimoto, with the DePaul Asylum and Immigration Clinic, and the Professor Albiol in that capacity as well. So that was just wonderful to be actually hands-on in it during my schooling as well.
So I guess evidently during those formative years, maybe you saw that uh, there needed to be more people in the legal profession helping immigrants. Is that kind of what inspired you?
Yes, I knew, again, I knew I wanted to work with immigrants in some capacity. Law school seemed like the most difficult path to do that.
Yep.
And so it was a fight tooth and nail to get through that, to be able to be where I am today. I had thought about pursuing a journalism path instead and working on immigrant issues in that capacity. But I felt that I could make more of the direct impact that I wanted to make, and work with clients one-on-one to get that personal impact through law. So that's how I got here.
So how many languages do you speak?
I speak two. I speak English and Spanish.
Awesome, awesome. And you learned Spanish just like through school, right?
I had my basics through school, but the majority of what I know is purely because of the work I've done and the people I work with. I'm forced to speak Spanish every day with my clients, and I love that about this job. I love that I'm forced into things that are uncomfortable for me, but make me grow and learn as a person.
So let us talk about immigration law now. What is the most important thing that you do the most in immigration law?
Majority of what I do right now and what I love to do is asylum. So there's two ways that a person can seek asylum in the U.S. It's either affirmatively or defensively. Affirmatively is when a person is not in court proceedings already, and so they file their asylum application through USCIS. if a person is in court, or if USCIS determines that they cannot find the person eligible for asylum, then they go through the court process, which is defensive, and they're in removal proceedings, and this is the asylum is their defense to removal. This is why they should not be removed.
What about those immigrants that want to get their green card, let's say, but they, of course, they came in illegally, but they do want to become legal, right? And then do they worry that if they start the ball rolling, then if they're not successful, then they might be deported?
That's a fear of a lot of people entering this this general area of litigation for immigration. And even as soon as you present any kind of application to USCIS or the courts, whatever it may be, you open yourself up to those hits from the government, to the possibility of detention, to the possibility of removal, which is a very scary thing. And I advise my clients on, you know, what I feel is the best route for them to take, depending on their personal circumstances. And for many people, taking that chance is worth it. If they have an asylum claim that is strong enough to get through, or if that's their only option, by all means. But a lot of the other ways that people seek out status here in the US, or just happen upon it, is if they fall in love with a US citizen, even if they've entered illegally, which is actually something that's a real hot topic right now with what Biden announced last week for new laws for family reunification or unification. But also we have availability for green cards and status for people who are victims of a crime here in the United States, called a U visa, as well as victims of domestic violence. If you've been married to a US citizen or legal permanent resident, and you were abused, you can seek a VAWA, Violence Against Women Act.
Okay. And are those common?
They are very common,
Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's my thing. I say to my clients is, you have been set through most of the time. If they're coming to me, they've been through such a horrible, horrible thing. But let's make something good out of that. Let's make something good happen. And that's why I love that these laws exist. These protections exist for these people, especially those ones who are harmed really here in the United States by US citizens most of the time. Let's make something good come from it.
And you mentioned earlier that if they have a strong enough claim to be to get the green card, what constitutes a strong enough claim?
So for asylum has its persecution. Persecution, not just how we use that word in day-to-day conversation, but it's a legal term. So we have to meet the bar of persecution by a government actor or an actor the government of their home country cannot control. This is typically gangs, families, something like that.
What is the burden of proof?
Well, that's an interesting question, because legally, you have to prove that there is a 10% chance of reasonableness that there's a reasonable fear of future harm if returned to their country of origin, or that this harm has already happened. 10%. Now, with all of the asylum claims in the system in the United States, that 10% line is rarely used. If it's used, is brought up, but any case that comes before me, I could say probably has a 10% chance of reasonable fear. However, can't logistically offer asylum to every single person that has been through harm, and that's a difficult part I have to explain to my clients is while the law is objective, it's also written in a subjective way that gives the USCIS officer and the judge this subjective power over the case to decide your case. So I can do everything in my power to get you to that point of attempting to win your case. But in the end, yes, I have to be a good lawyer. I have to argue my case very strongly, but it's up to the judge.
And there would some police reports from their home country, would that help if they have them?
Absolutely. And sometimes it can be argued that that doesn't help because that could prove that the government was willing to help protect against the persecutor if it wasn't the government themselves. So again, we had persecution by the government or a government actor, and it has to be based on five protected grounds: either race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, another legal phrase, or political opinion. And that political opinion and membership in a particular social group are what are highly used by people right now.
Such as a political party that's not the party in control. So, so would they have to relate their personal experiences, and then would they be grilled again and again to see if there are any discrepancies in their story about what happened to them?
For sure. Yeah, a judge has to find a person credible. So they have to retell their story first in a personal statement if the attorney that they're working with decides to offer that prior to. But if they're in court, then and before their USCIS interview, if they're affirmative, they do have to relay all of that information to the USCIS officer or the judge, so they know what the claim is based on. So it's really re-traumatizing for a lot of these people to not only have to think about these things again, but to have to speak about them in a way that is for their livelihood. So I try to offer therapy and counseling sessions. I work with or I have referrals to therapists. And a lot of people don't want to go that route. They don't want to open that Pandora's box and see what's inside, and I cannot fault them for that. But yeah, they have to not only share their story, but share it in a way that that judge thinks, okay, yeah, I believe you. Your story lines up. Everything is accurate. Not taking into account some of the effects that trauma can have on a person.
So do the clients have to maybe talk with a therapist and then have that therapist's opinion submitted as evidence that it's a credible claim of like post-traumatic stress.
Well, sometimes it can help to have that kind of a diagnosis from a professional of PTSD or anything along those lines to try to explain why a client might be acting or responding in a certain way, or why they can't remember something. And we use those kinds of diagnoses and reports from professionals in the U-Visa world as well, in the VAWA world.
In what?
U-Visa, so the victims of
okay.
crimes. Yeah, so to identify how the crime that has occurred has affected them mentally and emotionally.
Got it. This might but they said that when people are hypnotized, then they're able to reveal the truth. Is there any circumstances that you in which you know of that they actually use the hypnosis to prove that someone is telling the truth?
You know, Trudy, I cannot say that I've ever come across that, but that's an interesting thing. Maybe I'll think about that in my future cases.
Well, okay. So when and so it's only based on personal narratives. What evidence could your clients use if there is any to support their case?
Some of the evidence I use are photos of typically it's very grotesque photos of the injuries, or the deaths that have occurred in their family, or anything to evidence any of the harm that has been done in the past. We also use affidavits from family members, from people in their communities who have watched this persecution or this harm unravel and happen to the client, the victim. So majority of the time, a lot of these people don't have a lot of hard evidence that we would see in, your civil case in the United States that
Mhm.
would be required, because they've traveled a long way, or um, they've lost their phone in the jungle on the way
Mhm.
here or something like that, or it's been taken away, or they had to flee immediately and could not gather the evidence that they needed to take with them. So in those cases, it's really based on affidavits and their own personal statement.
Mhm. And then victims of human trafficking, you get those too, right? And then are they able to like present their evidence more easily because maybe they were rescued by law enforcement?
In an instance where they're rescued by law enforcement or they have those timelines of that trafficking abuse, yeah, that finding that evidence is definitely easier. But it's also none of this is easy, but I will say it's an easier process only because those trafficking cases are done affirmatively through USCIS and they're not going directly to the courts.
Mm,
So a T visa, a trafficking visa, that process is actually more similar to the victims of crimes visa,
mhm,
whereas it's just a waiting game, really.
mhm. And by waiting game, how long do they typically have to wait and why?
Yeah, I don't have the times for the T visa off the top of my head, but I know the U visa, the victims of crimes right now, that process is taking 4 to 5 years, or sometimes even more than that right now,
Mhm.
just because there's a backlog of applications that USCIS is dealing with.
So when they present themselves to the applications are processed, being processed, are they able to stay out of detention, just continue with their lives? They're not uh yeah
Priority by ICE.
yes.
Um, Generally speaking, someone who has submitted a U visa,
Hmm.
has not generally had much contact with ICE,
Hmm.
and so therefore probably not a big priority for ICE. Now, I will say if someone commits a crime during the time that they're waiting, or
Hmm.
even just a traffic stop sometimes
Hmm.
could be the key that leads to ICE detention.
Hmm.
But Chicago is a really great city because our officers don't work directly with ICE,
Hmm.
the local officers, to identify people in custody to therefore take them directly from government custody to ICE custody.
Hmm. Hmm. So when a uh an immigrant comes here undocumented, what is the first document that they usually get besides like their home country ID, like from Mexico, right? What are those?
So are you talking about when they come into the United
Yes.
States, when
Mm.
they immediately cross the border,
Yes. Well, let's say when they enter Chicago.
when they enter Chicago? This is a new thing that's been happening is we have been made available this city ID
Hmm.
that a city key ID, and people can apply for this. It's especially helpful if people do not have any form of ID with them because they lost it on the way or didn't have the opportunity to get it before they left the country.
Hmm.
Um, Now it is hard to get the city ID, but just a little card, has their photo on it, just a little bit of identifying information. Just to, and that's been used, for instance, for temporary protected status identification for that kind of application, along with their notice to appear if they have one, which is the notice from the government that they are in court proceedings.
Hmm. And notice to appear is when they got processed when they entered the country, like the migrant population, right?
Typically, they get the notice to appear at that point when they're
Mhm.
processed. There are a lot of cases where they get either a defective one or they don't get one at all. And that's a whole different area that we argue for no notice for court hearings. But if they do get it, it's either there or once USCIS determines that they cannot give a person the protection that they've applied for, then they would send a case to court, and the court would offer a notice to appear.
Mhm. The defective notice, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Defective notice is when the notice to appear does not have the time, date, or place of the actual hearing. So many times, the government is just so overwhelmed by the mass amount of
Mhm.
people who are coming in.
Mhm.
And there was a time, not so much now, but a few years ago, where they were giving notices to appear, which are NTAs, we call them,
Mhm.
with a basically saying to be decided on date, place, and time. Now, that would be defective
Mhm.
because it doesn't actually provide the notice.
Exactly, and then if they don't appear, then they're like a no show, and that's no good. But how could they know if nobody's telling them when?
Right, right.
So what happens when they do not appear in circumstances like that?
Typically, what's been happening is the judge is quick to give an order of removal in absentia, which just means the person didn't show up and therefore they have that order of removal from the United States.
Wow, that's and then are you able to appeal that for them because they were not able to appear because of the defective notice?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to see what works right now. There is this opportunity for people to provide a motion to reopen with it the strongest argument is within 180 days of that decision being made. But if they did not have notice and they can prove that with a defective NTA or no NTA, then they can claim that motion at any time.
Mhm. Because what happened is that if they got the defective notice, then they don't even know what day it was that they had to appear.
Mhm.
And if they got that notice of removal, they would not even know that. Is there any database where people could look that up? Maybe it's necessary for a lot of people to look that up.
Mhm. The government is expecting people to use an online case search service to track their cases. EOIR, Executive Office of Immigration Review, automated case search, basically.
Mhm.
So it's assuming that people can read English to be able to use that site, but also have the skills to be able to use a website and use a computer or a phone,
Mhm.
which many times a lot of these people are illiterate or don't have computer skills necessary to be able to do that.
And are there places where people could find the resources to help them check?
There are definitely a lot of nonprofits in the city that offer that kind of help, but it comes down to having an attorney who would be able to walk you through that process and
Mhm.
knows exactly what each step of it means.
And the defective notice does contain some identifying number that they could use to search the website.
So they need an A number to use this website, an alien registration number, it's called.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that word is still used, even though it's a
Mhm.
horrible word.
Mhm.
But that's how we identify people in the immigration system. So we have social security numbers. Undocumented immigrants have A numbers.
Mhm. So when they have for the A number, um, once they do get their social security number, if they're lucky and they uh, go through all the hoops, jump through all the hoops and they get their SSN, is that the SSN based off their A number or is it entirely new number? Do you know?
It'll be an entirely new number.
Mhm.
Yeah, they should keep that A number for their records. But that social security number will be just made by the SSA. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Let me see. When people so the first step, when would you say is the first step where people need to seek your help? In what circumstances should people take the step to seek the services of an immigration attorney?
I would say as soon as they enter the country, if possible, you know. So
Mhm.
asylum is weird. It you only have a year to apply for asylum after entering the country. Beyond that, you have to prove exceptional or changed circumstances to be able to get this type of protection.
And what does that mean? Exceptional or changed circumstances?
An example that comes up relatively frequently for this type of case is if a person is of the LGBTQ community and has not lived outwardly and openly in that identity until they come to the United States. And then maybe they have pictures online of their relationship, or they're active in a community, and their community back in their home country can identify them as that part of that LGBTQ community. Whereas before they might not have been able to do so. But if they return now with all of this out in the open, they would be subject to harm.
Okay. And is that frequent? Do you encounter many of these cases?
I do. I mean, for all the problems we have in the United States, and many people are still victims of crime and harm because of being a part of that LGBTQ community. Again, to use that for an example, many people feel that they are more free to live out that part of themselves here in the U.S. and feel safe doing so than they do in their home country. So, that's just one example of many that occur, but it's one that is, I would say, typically very strong evidence to prove changed circumstances.
Could you give us some other examples as well, so that if our listeners hear that it might apply to them, then they might be able to use them?
Sure. I mean, even if you have family members back at home who all of a sudden are victims of harm or are being targeted, and you're here in the United States, and you didn't beforehand have a fear of returning to your country, but now you're seeing all your family members go through this harm based on some protected ground, one of those 5 again. And you're like, oh my gosh, if I go home, I'm going to be a victim of the same thing. That would be another way.
And those would be some of those cases would be individuals that are already in the U.S. And then they have been working here for a while, but they cannot go back.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's a fear, there's a fear, and we can do everything we can to try to make that claim. Now, even if they don't meet that standard for asylum, and we don't meet the standard for changed or exigent circumstances, whatever it might be, or exceptional rather, they can claim withholding of removal. Basically asking the government, not asking for status, it's not technically a status, it's not the protection that asylum is, but just please don't remove me, because this is the harm that I will go through if I do. It's basically an influx of not removed, but no status. So, but that, to meet that standard burden of proof, is more, instead of the 10% of fear, it's 50%.
Oh, okay.
So it's a much higher burden.
What about those individuals who have lived in the U.S. for maybe over 10 years and then have been working hard and then now want to apply for legal status? What should they do?
That's the part that really breaks my heart about all of this, is that for those kinds of clients, there's not a lot I can do. There's not a lot in the law that allows for those people to prove, like, I'm a good person. I've contributed to American society. Like, please just let me stay here. Yes, paid taxes and got nothing from it. So for a lot of those people, the only way that I can help them is if they fall in love with an American citizen, or if they are a victim of a crime. So there's legislation being promoted right now for work permits for all. just because of everything that has gone on with the new arrivals and the Venezuelan migration to the US right now, and how all of those people, not all, but many of those people have access to work permits because they have been granted parole when they enter the United States, which is basically the US saying, okay, you can be here for this certain amount of time. But then after that, you start gaining illegal status or illegal time here. So they're either granted parole or they're eligible for temporary protected status.
These are like the immigrants from Ukraine or Afghanistan, right?
There's very few countries in the world that are eligible for TPS, but those are a few of them, yeah.
Okay, so for a just like an immigrant who has been here for over 10 years that we spoke of earlier, and if they have been a victim of a crime, just like let's say a crime on the street, does a crime like that, let's say if they have been a victim of a crime of violence, but would that suffice for them to be a victim of violence? It's not like they were trafficked or anything, but with just being a victim of crime, it's very easy to become a victim of crime sometimes.
It has to be an aggravated crime. So if someone physically assaults you, if you're held at gunpoint, for example, if you're stalked even, that's a ground for a U visa. It can't just be, I was robbed on the street, unharmed, no weapons used. It has to be very aggravated.
Well, what about if a person was stabbed because that person was trying to damage his vehicle?
The non-immigrant or the non-citizen?
Yeah, the non-citizen's vehicle, and then there was a offender that was just was a known offender that was damaging property in the area, and that person was in the process of damaging the immigrant's vehicle, and then when the immigrant went outside to ask the person to stop, then the immigrant was stabbed. Is that enough grounds for a visa like that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the specifics of a specific situation, but generally speaking, yeah, if you were assaulted during the procession of a crime that might not be violent in and of itself while it's happening, but you are then harmed because of that crime, absolutely. So what is necessary is that crime occurred, that it was aggravated, and that a police report was filed, and that non-citizen has been helpful in the prosecution of or finding the person who is responsible for that crime. So it doesn't mean that the perpetrator has to be found. The non-citizen just has to be willing to help police or any other, even a prosecution team, try to find that person, try to prosecute.
Okay. Well, that is helpful. Okay, and then let me see. There's so many aspects of let's see. What about so you mentioned other family members. What if like let's say a citizen has a family member in Cuba and wants to bring the person over? How difficult is that? It's like the person's son. Is that is that difficult if it's not a spouse but like his son?
Immediate family members are all of this is difficult, right?
It is,
All of
yeah.
this is time-taking, unfortunately. Immediate family members are the quote unquote easiest to get over. So that would be biological children and spouses. It still takes far longer than it should.
Yeah, is it because of that lottery? They're only allowed a certain amount of people into the US every year?
So that lottery, or rather that limited visa number,
Yes.
will be for brothers and sisters, parents, other family members like that.
Mhm.
Immediate family members, thankfully, do not have to abide by that.
So a son does not have to abide by that then? Oh.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So, but it still takes a long process because
Mhm.
they have to do consular processing interviews in their country. Those officers get to make that decision and wait on wait on whatever specifics they might feel are missing from the case, or will they need more information or another interview, whatever it may be. Technically, there's a time frame within which they must act, but there are many times that these processes after the interview with that family member do go on for 1+ years, just in this holding pattern, and there's not much that can happen other than suing the government.
Mhm. You mean suing the US about that allowing the a family
Mhm.
member to come in
Mhm.
quickly enough?
Yep, suing for an answer.
And so it's like it's almost like filing a Freedom of Information request, right? Almost like that.
It's it's basically saying I'm supposed to have an answer. You need to give it to me, and you need to tell me why you haven't made one yet.
Mhm.
So yes, basically give me the information.
Wow. And what is the pipeline like? Because these people that do they have a lot of competition for the government's time to help them?
The process is difficult.
Mhm.
The interviews themselves, whether it's here in the United States or in another country at a consulate,
Mhm.
can take anywhere from a half hour to multiple hours.
Mhm.
So even just that itty bitty bit of time is grueling.
Mhm. So in what ways could you as an immigration attorney help them facilitate the process? And why should they come to you for help?
They should come to any attorney for help and
Uh-huh.
not a notario or someone that claims themselves to be a paralegal or legal secretary. It's very important to have an attorney specifically who understands the background of the law and the intricacies of how to fill out an application. Um, you know, I try to do my taxes by myself. And it's very hard,
Mhm.
and I will likely make mistakes. And I like to go to my CPA for help with that, you know? Same thing with immigration. You could fill out these forms by yourself. You could do a decent job. Um, but there's specifics that an immigration attorney will know as to what to include, what not to include in the first round,
Mhm.
and then what supporting evidence would be necessary,
Mhm.
especially in those cases for spouses, fiancés, children, something like that, um, to make the case go smoother and faster.
Mhm. And sometimes it does make a big difference. Could you give us a little insight about how big a difference that makes? If they like what you said, without the supporting evidence, then they'll have to. It's hard to wait for them to respond. But if they respond that they need more supporting evidence, that means that you have to wait another another round of the same
Mhm.
waiting time.
Sure, and you have to respond to their request for evidence. It's just it extends the process by a lot. And not to say that that can't happen with an attorney. I mean, it's just part of the process sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes USCIS officers will miss something that is actually there in the
Mhm.
application.
Mhm.
But one thing I will say, for instance, on the asylum application, um, there's a little box on the first page that asks, would you like to apply for withholding of removal and Convention Against Torture protections as well? And if you miss that little box, you don't get access to those protections if your asylum claim is rejected.
Mhm.
So, and those protections are more difficult um, to receive.
Mhm.
However, you want to make sure that you are accessing all of the protections available to you.
Mhm.
So if you have a notario or a friend who's been doing everybody else's forms around you, and they say, oh yeah, they're great, they got me my asylum. Don't trust it. Don't trust it. So there's that little box, and then even for when you're checking off the boxes on that asylum application for which grounds of protection you are seeking, many notarios do not check the membership in a particular social group box or even the Convention Against Torture box there as well. So you're missing opening up your story to more of those potential legal arguments by missing those opportunities there.
So, in other words, they should check as many boxes as possible of anything that might apply to them. Yeah, because some people might be confused that they only have to like check one box and then they miss everything else.
Right. You need the legal expertise. I mean, again, you can try to do it by yourself, and many people do, or many people seek the help of the internet to do things, but there are lawyers who do this for a living and only this for a living for a reason.
And what other advice would you give immigrants who need help to be for status?
I would say if you are seeking the help of an attorney, to be very forthcoming. I cannot help you to the greatest extent if I don't know your whole background. There are people who are very ashamed of if they have a criminal background or something like that, and have righted their ways since that time. But if you don't tell me about that, then the government knows all. I just act as if the government knows all, because a lot of the times they do. And I'm not going to know all until you tell me, or unless we agree to do a FOIA request, that Freedom of Information Act request. So if the government is acting with information that they have, but I don't have, I cannot support your case to the strongest of my ability.
You know that, of course, ex-offenders, people that have been incarcerated in this country, it's so hard for them to get a job or get the rights to just be a functioning citizen. So, but however, how hard is it if they are forthcoming, the immigrants, if they are forthcoming that they did have a record, but they have changed, are they able to get their status if they have a criminal record?
Very case specific, very case specific, depending on what type of status or protection they're applying for, and what the crime or the conviction was. I will say the most overarching protection for these people from removal would still be withholding of removal and Convention Against Torture protections, proving that they would be harmed or tortured if they go back to their country of origin.
Okay, Hannah, well, thank you so much for giving us all this information about immigration law and how migrants and other immigrants can be helped by seeking legal assistance. Could you give our listeners information about how they could reach you and find more information?
Sure. I'm on Instagram as @Blackwell Immigration Law. My website is www.blackwellimmigration.com. And all of my contact information is on there as well. And then my phone number, direct line, 773-951-9903.
Thank you so much, Hannah Blackwell, for all the information that you gave us. And this is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM.